Good morning. A few years ago, the company that I work for went through a rebranding. We took an entire day out of work to decide on a new logo and what our core values were going to be, what our mission statement was going to be. And my thought was, well, man, I know some core values because we as Christians have core values, right? The company's not going to have the same core values that I have, though, as a Christian. Love, forgiveness, those kind of values. But honesty and integrity is. We also have missions as Christians, right? And sometimes those missions overlap with one another. We look at Jesus as our example. He had missions as well, right? Luke 19:10 tells us that Jesus came to seek and save the lost. John 6:38 says that he came to do the will of his Father. Matthew 5:17 says that he came to fulfill the law. We could go on, right? Jesus had many missions, and sometimes they overlap. But let's look at one more. Let's turn over to Mark chapter 10. I'm using a different Bible than I typically use to preach out of because I use a slimline Bible, but I grabbed it this weekend and black stuff started coming off on my hand. So I had the cheap pleather cover and it started to fall apart. So I apologize if I fumble with this very big Bible. Let's look at Mark 10 and look at verse 45. It says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve." Jesus had another mission. It was to serve. Not only his Father, but to serve mankind as well. I'm not a PowerPoint guy, guys. I'm sorry. I may not catch up on the clicking like I'm supposed to, but I'm going to do my best. In Mark, Jesus says some other things about service that apply to us. In this context, in Mark 10, he is addressing his disciples' desire to be great in heaven. So let's back up a little bit and let's look at verse 43. "But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be a slave of all." What then does that mean for us? I'm used to teaching a class, so I'm going to ask a lot of questions, but don't worry, just like in class with the high school and junior high kids, if I don't get an answer, I'll answer the answer myself. I do not expect you to answer me, but I just ask questions. We must be servants. We must serve one another. Yesterday, we spent all day in Katy at a band contest. And you know me, I'm a band nerd. Band are my people. And I'm also kind of chatty. So I just started talking to the guy in front of me, and we were discussing how fall band takes a lot of time. I mean, a lot of time. And I was telling him that last season was my son's freshman year, and I grew up doing band, but I don't do band like the school where my son goes to school does band. It's intense. So last year, I made the mistake of agreeing to teach the adult class on minor prophets in the fall. And the very first class was the day after a band competition. We didn't get home until 2 in the morning. And so I was explaining to him that I swore I would never volunteer for anything in the fall again, just because I don't have the bandwidth for that. And I said, and in fact, actually, I'm preaching tomorrow morning. We went on talking about other things, and he eventually asked me what the topic of my lesson was going to be. And I told him, Christians serving other Christians. And he said, that's it? And of course, I kind of went on the defensive a little bit. Yeah, I mean, that's important. Christians are supposed to serve other Christians. And I went through, and he's like, yeah, okay, I get it. Of course, when you're talking to somebody and you think of a great thought, it always comes like 3 or 4 minutes after the moment has passed. And I thought, Galatians 6. I should have used Galatians 6. Do good to all men, but especially those of the household of faith. I didn't go back and tell him that because once the moment's passed, it's passed. But think about this. I mean, why did you come to the assembly? Was it to be served by the song leader? Was it to be served by the prayer leaders? Was it to be served by the preacher? Or did you come with the mindset that I'm going to serve? I'm going to come prepared for class and make comments and answer questions in class, and that's going to help to serve my brethren. Or did you come thinking, I'm going to sing because through singing I can encourage my brethren? Did you come thinking you're going to serve by fellowshipping with the saints, talking and conversing and uplifting them? When you go home this afternoon or into this next week, do you have the mindset of how can I serve? Or do you have the mindset of I kind of expect to be served? If you're trying to follow the example of our Savior, your mindset is how can I serve? I should serve. Let's look at John 13. John 13, starting in verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, and I'm reading from the ESV, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus knew his time to be crucified had come. Let's skip down to verse 3. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was around him. Jesus, knowing that his time on earth was coming to an end, at that moment decided to wash his disciples' feet. This is the same Jesus that John the Immerser said not that long ago, I'm not even unworthy to untie his sandals. And here this man is taking off his robe, getting on his hands and knees and washing his disciples' feet. But wait, it gets better. Whose feet is he washing? Isn't Peter there? Verse 6 tells us that Peter's there. He knows that Peter's going to deny him 3 times before the rooster crows. Who else is there? Verse 11 tells us that Judas Iscariot is there, the one who's very shortly going to betray him in the garden. In fact, doesn't Matthew 26 tell us that all of his disciples are going to flee when he's arrested? Jesus knows this is going to happen. He knows all things. He's here washing the feet of these men who are going to abandon him, deny him, and betray him. So then what's Jesus showing us? He's showing us who we should serve, and who is that? All of our brethren. All of them. Right? Not just the ones we like or who we get along with, forgetting the ones who did that thing a month or 2 or years ago, right? We're supposed to serve everyone. Let's read on. Let's jump down to verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, Blessed are you if you do them. Read verse 14 again. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Jesus is teaching his disciples and us, by example, how to serve. So you might be thinking, now Josh, you really expect me to wash my brethren's feet? Is Jesus just talking about washing feet here? Of course not. He's talking about serving one another. We don't do feet washing today, but we do a lot of other things. A lot of other things that people need help with. This example shows us that service to our brethren is a learned behavior. Learned behaviors are taught. Parents, grandparents, we have to teach our children and our grandchildren, and sometimes our great-grandchildren, how to serve. I remember watching my grandmother. She lived in a tiny 2-bedroom trailer house in a little no-name town in East Texas. There were literally spots in the floor that you had to walk around for fear of falling through. She didn't have a whole bunch of money, because what she did have, she'd already given it away to other people. What she did have was the ability to cook a meal. And you could bet that if you were sick or hurting, Dee Calgary was going to fix enough food for you and the army of caretakers and family that might be staying at your house. Because that's what she could do. She was teaching her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren how to serve. So you give the fill-in preacher an eye roll and say, fine, I'll serve my brethren. It doesn't work that way. Let's look at Galatians 5. Let's look at Galatians 5. Let's go down to verse 13. For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Doesn't Paul tell us that we're knit together? He tells the Colossians, rather, that you're knit together with love. Love is the driving force for us serving our brothers and sisters. It's a choice that we need to make, brethren, to serve one another. And just like every other duty we have as Christians, if you do it with the wrong attitude, you may as well not do it at all. Let's turn over to 1 Corinthians 13. One of my favorite songs comes from 1 Corinthians 13. Starting in verse 1. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am nothing. I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have and deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Couldn't this scripture easily say, if I serve my brethren with all manner of good deeds and do it without love, it is nothing? I added an extra click in there. I don't know why that's in there. Sorry. Let's turn to 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, starting in verse 8. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each has received a gift. Use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Now, verse 9 says, do it without grumbling. That's not what I want to focus on, but that's important. Look at verse 10 again. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Each has received a gift. Who does that leave out? Does that leave out anyone? Each has received a gift that they can use to serve. And received it from where or whom? From God. We each have a gift from God that we can use to serve. Some people say you have the gift of gab. Sometimes somebody just needs somebody to gab at or gab with, right? So we all have gifts that we can serve with. So then, if you aren't serving, the question is why? It's because you've chosen not to. That's the only reason, because you've been given a gift. Let's skip down to verse 11 of 1 Peter 4. Whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Christ Jesus. So if you think you can't serve, you're calling God a liar because he gives you the strength to do it. And if you think you have nothing to offer, you're wrong again, because God has given each of us a gift that we can use to serve. And that service is done to glorify God. It's not about you or I, or where I want out of it, or what we want to get out of it, or getting kudos. It's about giving God the glory. Let's turn over to 1 Corinthians 10. So whatever you eat or drink, or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Do you remember when Jesus was talking to his disciples in Matthew 25? And he says, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. And he went on and on and on. What does disciples say? What are you talking about, Jesus? We didn't see you in these situations. What was his answer? Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. We serve our brethren and should serve our brethren like we're serving Jesus. You remember Jesus' parable of the talents? When you're a kid, you think parable of talents, that's a talent, right? That's something I have to do. Talent's actually a measure of money. And I've had teachers sometimes say we really shouldn't use it as it's talents, like abilities that we have, but I don't think that's right. I think it can be applied monetarily, but to other things too, because a talent simply represented something that they were given by the master. And didn't we just read in 1 Peter that our master has given us something, that gift that he gave to each of us? Let's turn to Matthew 25. Starting in verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them to his property. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. There's that gift we have, right? We're giving a gift according to our ability. Then he went away. We're in verse 16. He who had received 5 talents went away and traded them and made 5 more. And he also who had 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward bringing the 5, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5, and I have made 5 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also said to the one with 2 talents, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2. Here I have made 2 more. And the master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He who also received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you were a hard man, repaying where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you are, what is yours? But the master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I had not sown and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to those who have 10 talents. For to everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. But for those who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What does the master do to the worthless worker? He cast him into outer darkness. You think, okay, you threw him out of the house. It says weeping and gnashing of teeth, folks. That's hell. That's hell. But what does the master say to the faithful workers? Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. What's the joy of our master? Heaven. Heaven. Wouldn't those be beautiful words to hear? Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. We must be servants. We must be servants of God to our brethren. Paul, I forgot to tell you I had a song in here. You ready? We're going to sing servant song.
Make me a servant just like your son, for he was a servant. Please make me one. Make me a servant. Do what you must do to make me a servant. Make me like you. Make me a servant. Take all my pride, for I would be lowly, humble inside, giving to others with all that I do. In love for my brother, make me like you. Make me a servant till by your might, and may all my neighbors shine with your light. Show me your footsteps and what I should do, for now and forever. Make me like you.
So then, we've established that service is a Christian duty. But that would necessitate that we would have to be able to serve our brethren. A few months ago, I presented a Wednesday night devo on bearing one another's burdens. I'm going to reiterate a few of those points because I think they apply. One of the things I mentioned was, as Christians, we need to let our brethren help us. We don't need to keep things bottled up to ourselves and kind of deal with them alone. You shouldn't say, I'm a private person, I really don't want to let you in. I don't want to reveal my struggles to you because they're embarrassing or I'm ashamed or I just don't want you to know. That's not the way God intended his people to be. Did the disciples tell Jesus, no, don't wash our feet? Peter tried, didn't he? And what did Jesus tell Peter? If I don't wash your feet, I don't share with you. We're not sharing. We must allow our brethren to help us, to serve us. We have to allow our brethren to fulfill their Christian duty of service. And to do that, we have to know that there's something that needs. There's a need. There's something that needs to be helped. Kendra and I were listening to the Southside Lectures recently, and Russ Bowman was presenting that night, and he said, I'm sorry if I'm stepping on people's toes. And he said, wait a minute. No, I'm not. That's the whole point, right? The whole point is like the Hebrew writer tells us, to stir one another up to love and good works. That's the whole point. And I hope that's what I've done with you this morning. I hope and pray that I've stirred you up to love and good works, because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to stir one another up. If you haven't been the servant that you know you should have been, there's an opportunity. We have lots of people who need our help. Lots of folks hurting. Lots of folks in need. If you haven't taken the first step of being a servant of God, by becoming a member of his church, by becoming part of his body through baptism, now's the time. If you would come, stand and sing.